Good evening. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting, June 3rd, 2025. It's 5:30 p.m. I'm calling this meeting to order, and I'm going to take a roll call of the committee, and then I'll introduce everybody else that's at the table. First of all, we have Vice Chair Anthony Maddox Jr.
Here.
And we also have Council Member Jim Posh.
Here.
And joining us this evening, also Councilor Cobb and Councilor Petrus. And then also from Finance, we have Director Hairston and Assistant Director Caldwell. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we are going to do a rearrangement on the agenda so that Mr. Bob Ivory, who's the Executive Director of Students of Promise, can sit here while we have a discussion about the funding source that we were going to use for the Imani project, the shelter for the women. So it was suggested by Councilor Russell, Vice President Russell, that we could possibly look at using ARPA, but I got an email back from Brian Iorio, and he said we have allocated everything from ARPA at this point, so we don't really have any funds unless there was a rearrangement made. We talked about being flexible on it, but for now there's not ARPA funding, so I'm trying to figure out what the best resource would be for $100,000, Director Hairston.
I think we would have to go back and just really take a look at the budget, reprioritize something, and then see how possible it would be to repurpose $100,000. So right now, I don't have the information in front of me to kind of make that decision, but it's definitely something that we can take back and take a look at it and report back to you.
This would be a budget amendment, so would it have to go to the county auditor for approval?
I think we could modify the budget
Okay.
and repurpose the funds.
Okay.
And then the county auditor will just certify it. I think anything that's deemed a fit purpose would probably not receive any pushback from the county.
Is process now, are we okay to go ahead and vote on the legislation in council before it goes to the county? Once you've determined which account it would come out of, would we need to wait on that legislation until it's been approved by the county auditor, or can we proceed like on the 16th?
I spoke to the mayor about this earlier today. All indications are that we can proceed with legislation.
Okay.
I think the last step would be certification from the county auditor.
Okay.
So I want to double check that answer with law. But
Thank you.
the conversation I had with them this afternoon indicated that we could move forward.
So I would like to ask. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
No, go ahead.
Just a curious question. You probably don't know the answer to this, but I was just wondering if we've ever done a single gift like this of this size for something, or an award. I was just curious. It just, as you were talking to anyone about, if you spoke to anyone about this, I was trying to look back and see if council had ever allocated, or maybe when you heard historically, if anything has ever come in this amount outside of the ARPA allocations. You move that out. I was trying to think if there's anything we've ever done like this. Because if not, I know anything that you're doing is kind of setting a precedent for us. So I'm just thinking about future requests and what that looks like and that impact of those. And that's what I'm wondering as we're having a conversation. Because and the reason I'm bringing that up now is because wherever we're pulling this from, I think is going to be a part of that conversation for any future funding. And so as I'm running that through my head, I'm just wondering historically if there's any precedent at all for so.
Because it will be a grant.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I was just going to use that word grant, so I'm glad you used it, because I think this is more of a grant that the city is providing your facility, in the interest of what's best for the city. It would be curious to see if there's any historical knowledge. I don't even know where, I think we've lost a lot of institutional knowledge. I mean, I don't know or even else to ask.
Yeah, because I started to reach out to Susanna before this meeting, just out of curiosity to see, because I know absolutely we've done some much smaller grants, and those would do This, I think, outside of ARPA, would have to be the largest, at least since I can recall. Okay. And I'm just wondering, in terms of future processes or requests, what that looks like currently here. Because there's only so many of these you can do at that amount. I just want to make sure. I was just curious.
Discussion for committee of the whole, we think?
So I did have some additional questions regarding, how we process legislation that's related to likely your conversation with the mayor. It is probably going to be off topic. Can we finish?
Yes, I would
Can I
prefer
just
that.
ask for a placeholder so we can have that conversation before this meeting ends?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other question I've gotten is, what will the $100,000 that the city would be granting you and your organization, what would that be used for?
Excellent question, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. In essence, these dollars would be primarily, and I can actually speak definitively, I would say nothing less than 80% of these funds would be programmatic. It's just not just a shelter. A lot of times I speak of what something is without referencing what it is not. It's not necessarily just a shelter. We're transitioning women and their children that are homeless into some stable, long-term, permanent housing. But in that process, we're trying to deal with all the mitigating factors that cause homelessness in the first place. And they are complex. And that is done programmatically. I'm in the district with my initiative, which is Students Farmers, which we have an array of wraparound services that help students matriculate through high school. So now we're talking about having a family matriculate from being unhoused into a permanent situation. So all of the ancillary services in between, financial literacy, social emotional learning, trauma-informed care, family reunification where it's appropriate, mentoring for the children that will be in the facility, credit readiness. We have relationships with banks that are going to offer some services. So these dollars would help us programmatically sustain some of these services and some of these, I would say, some of the mitigating factors that create homelessness, and use these dollars to help support group facilitation, supplies. I have a computer lab component. There's a early learning facility that will be inside the facility. So imagine a mom that's working at Amazon or working at the airport, and so childcare will be provided within the facility, and that can be supported so she can actually work and not have to be concerned about childcare, because our early learning program or center that will be inside of the facility itself can be supported. So these dollars will be primarily programmatic, and then obviously dollars for personnel.
Just a quick question, in terms of these dollars that you're receiving, do you know if it will be helpful for any other grant opportunities that you guys are looking for in terms of matching funds?
Yes.
Or to approvals for that? I was just wondering, because I was hoping with a grant of this size, that'll trigger some other giving, but I didn't know what that looked like.
That's an excellent question, because there have already been some resources that have been matched. The initial resource, came from Cuyahoga County. They afforded $250,000 in ARPA funds towards this project. The majority of that is more brick and mortar, help bring the building up to obsolete code, and there's some specific things to, I believe it's on this lodging house that have to happen according to the great city of Cleveland Heights. So those dollars are heavily going to be dependent on some of the brick and mortar, some of the hard costs. In addition, I was just checking my phone when I was in the car. I just saw that the Senate passed their version of the budget. Now they have to go back, reconcile with the House, and hopefully the government signs it. Well, Councilman Fernell Jones and I were in Columbus just Friday and gave testimony to the Senate's Finance Committee, because there are dollars in that budget specific to this project for the 2 years, fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. The amendment was written by State Senator Ken Smith. And so we went to give public testimony. So of course I cannot speak to those dollars until I see the actual what was passed today, which I hope that it supports this project. But those resources as well will go to contribute to help what my former mentor, the late C.J. Prince, would call, when I was in the governor's initiative for COVID and TBF, a shared responsibility. So the whole premise of this whole process is to have shared responsibility, foundations, city, state, private, as the banks are at the table. So hopefully we can all share the responsibility and help to address homelessness, specifically in Cleveland High School. There's an extremely large number of students in this district identified as youth. Hope that answered.
I did. Just one more, pretty much a statement from my time on the planning commission and dealing with that particular building. When the property's being sold and the plans were happening, it's clear that whoever had that building had to do extensive interior work just because of its very unique interior design. On the outside, you can't really tell there's a lot. And so I'm happy to hear the county stepped up for that. I was wondering if any funding needed to be used for that specifically from the Cleveland Heights, just because everyone that's tried to touch that building has realized that it extensive interior work just to make that work. And so I'm glad that the county stepped up for
That
that.
they did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, to move on. I would if you can get us that information by the 16th on the funding source so that we can bring it to the committee of the whole, are you okay with passing it back to the committee of the whole?
There is one other portion of that funding part that as you asked the question about in terms of ARPA dollars and things and whether or not that we could shift anything.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see any opportunity? I know we had conversations about what we've allocated. Do you see any opportunity where we could do that, or is it something we're really going to have to find a solution? I was curious.
It looks to me like so many of the projects are just getting underway.
Yeah.
Do we really want to shift them right now?
Right.
Yeah. Or maybe by year end or maybe even during budget season. That'd be something to look at. So.
This is all related. We've had a pretty large open positions report in the past. And the way I would justify this is if we're not at full capacity staff-wise, there's likely budget money sitting there someplace that can afford this. I name a couple of top positions that I don't believe have been filled, but and that's money that we're never going to need. I mean, it could be perceived as a savings, but it would be helpful to see what the open positions report is, just to get a read on what that is. I mean, during the budget process, there was a lot of conflicting information on. There were some cuts that the mayor made in order to right-size the budget, I believe. But I believe some of those were made, and I don't want to use the word arbitrary. There was not a word that the mayor used. There was another word that the mayor used, but it was at his discretion. And I don't know if the budget was actually built based on a 100% filled position.
Finance Committee for Council.
See, with Brian,
Iorio?
yeah.
I'm just curious to see if we can get an open positions report, and if there's a big enough amount of funds available, it would be helpful to see. Just roughly like that to help, at least in my mind, justify this.
That's the first thought that came to my mind when this request for $100,000 came up. There are a number of open positions, and especially in the police area, and some executive positions. So, and we're almost at midpoint. So a lot of those salaries will build up, and in terms, so it could easily add up to $100,000.
Well, last year there was like 20 million of unused budget money, roughly.
9.
So
Hang on a
9.
second. Hang on a second. Is it standard accounting procedure to move money from personnel to something like this? Is that all acceptable in government order?
I believe so, yes.
Councilor Pash.
Just as a reminder that even if we had ARPA funds left over, as the law director confirmed yesterday, the deadline for allocating those funds was December 31st. So even if they were available, we're not able to change those allocations any longer.
Although, when we were talking ARPA, we did get to points when they said,
and then move through the process if we,
Not right now, I'm not talking about right now, but towards the end of this year, middle of next year, if there's something sitting there that's not been done, the project's not gonna happen. It seems to me that they were, it's okay for us to shift those monies.
My understanding was different, but you know, we could engage the law
Because
director.
if we have a project we're not doing and we don't spend it,
Right.
it's gonna go back to the
Right,
government.
exactly.
I thought there was a request process for that, we would just have to let them know.
Yeah,
But there were specific reasons, I think.
I think if it's revenue replacement monies, you have a lot more flexibility.
right,
But
that's true.
you have
yeah.
to see what was used or unused in those areas.
So are we okay at this point to say that we are ready to send it back to committee of the whole for Director Harrison's information on the 16th? In terms of where it's gonna come from? Yeah, and nobody's saying no. We're just looking for the source. Thank you so much for coming this
Thank you so much.
evening.
I appreciate you all.
Excited about this project.
Good luck.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And keep us informed,
I
please.
certainly will, certainly. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Enjoy the weather.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Cut Anthony's grass.
Please and thank you. Please and thank
You were looking for help.
All right, Director Harrison, I'll give the table to you for the financials for March and April if you have them.
So I have some interesting data to share this evening. I have the fund report at 9 copies, so I will circulate this. This is a report that was requested at our last meeting. And this is the first quarter of 2025. Did I get into it? I think I have one. Give that one.
Thank you. Would have thought you would have had it.
This report was requested the last time we met on April 28th, so I went through the tedious process of updating this report. Couple things of note: revenue at 28,252, 48 million. I extrapolated that out for the next 3 quarters, so that comes to 113 million in revenue with the extrapolation versus a budget of 100 million. Expenditures, 26,298,000. Extrapolated that for the next 3 quarters. That comes to 105,193 versus a budget of 105,078.
That's good.
Yeah, pretty accurate. Also bought the bank recs. So I'm going to circulate those. This is one of the another item. So there's three of those. So you can just pass that whole packet down to. No. That's one packet. It's all one packet. So that's January, February, and March.
Are you departing? Let the record show that Mayor Sarin has just joined us.
Did you guys forgot? No, there's three in one packet. Three.
I'll take one if you have one.
Okay, this is a full packet.
All three.
Yep, all three, January, February, March. Do you have a full packet?
Yes, I have.
And these are the bank recs, they'll request it.
How did it look to you, bottom line?
Looked pretty accurate. If you, I really focused on March,
Mm-hmm.
which has a cash balance, 113 million. Should be all right. Yeah, that might be all right.
Definitely got $100,000.
I also went back, I went and did some research in terms of some of the reports that were provided to council, looking backwards. So you have I identified several reports, the fund report, the general fund report, unencumbered funds, all funds revenue, all funds expense, some type of a 5-year report in the bank recs. This evening, I supplied you with the first and the 7th report, the bank recs, as well as the fund report. For the last 30 days, we basically shifted resources in the finance department to focus on a project that I thought was more important, and that's this report right here. This is a copy of the unaudited financial statements for the year of 2023 that has been submitted to the county auditor. So I brought one copy. We managed to get this through. It's almost 1 year late, but it's complete. I feel real good about it. Again, I can send a PDF copy to all the counselors at the conclusion of this meeting. This is it's complete, and we're waiting for the to receive the opinion back.
That'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Are they able to give you any kind of a timeline right now?
I would expect probably 90 to 120 days to get an opinion, but right now, I think our next step in the finance department is to immediately begin work on 2024. I'd like to get that in within the next 90 to 120 days if possible. And that way, when we conclude this year, we're simultaneously going to be starting the budget process very soon. But I'd like to make those two deliverables my goal to complete before year end.
Okay, so is this, maybe I misheard, this is delivered to the county.
That is correct.
So this is the state.
State audit. Yeah.
That's what I was hoping for. So this has already had the gap conversion done. And
Yes.
okay, and this is complete with all the asset information that I believe you guys were working on before.
Yes.
Okay. We know it's pretty late, but we'll just leave it at that. So can you clarify again what we're looking at to get to this point with last year's 2024? You have to submit this. You have to submit our unaudited funding to some accounting source to do the gap conversion. Have you gotten to that point yet?
So that has been submitted to Scott Reeves, as a CPA. It's been gap converted.
Okay.
Complete. It's been submitted to the state auditor. They will render back an opinion. I'm hoping for a clean opinion. At that point, the report will be final and complete.
The next step is going through the same process, working with Scott Reeves and Sean Hart to deal with the same information. We've just gone through this process, so we feel like it should be a seamless transition to doing the same process again, providing them with all of the information that they need, working in very, very close collaboration with them in an ongoing and rigorous way, so that we can get this done as quickly as possible. And then Scott Reeves will, and Sean Hart will do the same process there with Zipka and Sean Hart, and then pass that on to the state auditor for the 2024 audit as well.
So, there's a timeline when all that has to get done. And I know we're still working through some capacity issues that were hopefully in the past now. I don't want to find ourselves in a position this time next year where this is happening. I mean, do we have an expected date when we believe we'll have it all wrapped up and we will have an audited financials for 2024? I mean, is there some goal? Is there some expectation that we have as a city when that would be? When that be done?
My expectation is that we've already applied for and received a 30-day extension on the deadline.
Okay, great.
However, we will likely need another 30-day extension after that in order to complete the work. Initially, we asked for a 60-day, they only grant 30 days. but they advised us to request an additional 30-day extension once that, is close to elapsing so that we can extend that to a 60-day extension. And I don't know what your thoughts are. I mean, my preference is that we're done tomorrow, obviously, but since that is not a realistic possibility, I'd love for us to be able to get all of this information to them well in advance of the 60-day total 2 extensions potentially has elapsed. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I'll be pushing for that as much as I can and assisting in any way I can.
Is there any concern that the 2024 unaudited reports be turned in before the 2023 is completed and back to us? I mean, is that
The 2024 financials are based off
On
of
what you submitted?
off of the 2023 financials.
okay?
So that's 2023 is like the end, and 2024 is a new starting point in time. So it was very important to get that report completed so we can begin. So Scott has sent over a list of items that we can begin working on. So the process will begin immediately for the 2024, and we will get through 2024 a lot faster than we did 2023.
But to your question though, Counselor, I believe that if your question was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if your question had to do with once the state auditors completed their work, that there may be something in that work that could change our 2023 financials and inform our 2024 submission. I don't believe that's a probability. I don't think that we have that to worry about. But I also know, based on our interaction and work with them, that should that occur, and I don't think that it would, but should it occur, they will be flexible and allow us to make changes as a result of any changes that might occur as a result of the state audit process.
Thank you.
I really want to say this in the most kindest way I possibly can. We really have to figure this out. I know you guys are in the process of figuring it out, and that is wonderful. But I can tell you that the community has the expectation to have audited financial statements from the previous year in the next year. I mean, around the midpoint of that year, roughly, okay? So that would mean, this is 2 years away. We've got 1 year back that hopefully if it was a perfect world, we'd be getting audited financial statements, somewhere in the July, August, I think worst case September kind of timeframe. It's really, really important that we do that and get to a point where the city is doing that. Now I know you're new, you're cleaning things up, and I appreciate that. And I just can't stress enough that we need to figure out, to have an expectation just to get that done. And I understand it seems like it's a big priority with everybody in this room, but it's a huge priority with the community. I mean, it is one of those things that's on a list where, when people look at what goes on within these walls, they're critical of, and I don't want anybody to be critical of it. I just want to try to see if we can figure out the best thing to get this thing fixed. The process is to do it. And I know it's not just pushing paper. There's a lot of stuff underneath there that had to get cleaned up in order to get to this point. I appreciate that work.
It sounds like they're getting to work on it right away, so.
I've got a lot of great ideas.
Okay.
Sean Caldwell's been one of them, and I've got a couple other people that are going to step up to the plate to deliver your 2024 financials in a very timely basis.
Different capacity than we had last year, so.
Yep.
Should be reassured.
And I did want to express a great deal of appreciation for Director Hairston on one particular thing. In the position that I'm in, we rely on getting accurate information in order to make decisions. And one of the things that has been extremely refreshing about Director Hairston is his willingness to provide bad news, his willingness to express need where need exists, instead of sort of attempting not to rock the boat by expressing a confidence in capacity or hiding bad news in order to avoid whether it's accountability or just a difficult conversation. That's one thing that Director Harrison has not shied away from, and it's a welcome change. And it is only once you are allowed to recognize an issue that you can address it. And one of the things that has been problematic is, for instance, with the capacity issue, when people who are doing the work are telling you, no, we're fine, we don't need additional people. When you're offered repeatedly, like, are you sure? And you want to take the subject matter experts at their word, and you want to take their advice. And with someone like Director Harrison, who is willing to sit you down and say, hey, we have this problem. We got to do something about it. I can't know until he tells me, and he's willing to tell me. And I appreciate that. And that's, I think, why we're going to be on the right track.
So I'm gonna move on to the next item, going back up to the beginning of the agenda. Updating the fourth quarter 2024 financials. Do you see those being posted on the website in the near future?
We're gonna try to get those on the website in the next 30 days. Those are complete, they just need to be put in the friendly format.
Yeah.
Once we get them in the friendly format, we'll get them up on the city's website.
Go ahead.
So is the friendly format, I mean, just so I know, I'm getting a clear understanding of the level of work. So in the perfect world, your accounting system presents that in the friendly format. I assume that's not the case here. I assume you're exporting them to Excel or something like that, and you're
Manipulating
There's a lot
and
of
sorting
post-report and manipulation.
and then looking and then duplicates, eliminating duplicates. It's a very time consuming.
well, it also leaves a lot of room for errors.
It does.
And no matter how good you are, that kind of stuff happens. Is there any outside, I mean, it seems like it's also kind of clerical work is, I don't wanna, clerical related spreadsheet work. Is there resources that you can utilize outside your department or hire out to get some of that stuff done quicker? I mean, with that, I mean, are there things that, and I ask that from a budget perspective from, for council, I mean, is there something that we can do budget wise to make some of this work easier? Or is there like an add-on that you can get for the accounting system that we have that would produce this? I guess there's things that if we throw some money at, smart money, would it make your job easier?
Well, one of the things that you talked about was room for error. So when you run a report in New World, it gives you that total. So that total, 10 million, for example. Then you do all the manipulation to get it in this format. You're looking for that same total.
Yeah.
That exact same total. So you know whether you've done it correctly or not correctly. So that's kind of the check and balance for that.
And just to add to that, there are some other ways that you can check on this. We do like to, when we can, automate a lot of this. So, not doing sort of key and data entry when not necessary. So we're tying spreadsheets to spreadsheets in order to ensure that the values tie. And you can see if they don't. Although in those times when we've had to do sort of key and data entry, we do double check that. And apparently I'm very good at data entry. So that's, but yeah, we do double check that, and we do try to automate as much as possible from trusted sources of data that have been double checked.
So just going forward, I'm looking at different resources. couple of people that have been suggested in terms of providing temporary resource. So I'm looking at that angle in terms of getting some of the audit work done and some of the reporting work done.
Mhm.
So a lot of time is spent just going through day-to-day operations, if you will, making sure payroll's on time, making sure the bills are paid on time. There's just a lot of what I'm going to call just day-to-day operational work that we do. And these projects kind of get in the way of it. So I'm looking to just shift in some resource for maybe 8 to 10 weeks to knock out some of these larger projects. And that like I said, I'm hoping to have an on-time budget and completing this 2024 audit as quickly as possible.
Okay,
Speaking of these reports that we got last time, I went through that analysis not to find any errors, but I wanted to know if I could tie the end of year 2024 to the reports that we got for January, February. And because the encumbrances weren't included, that required some work to get to that point. I only did 4 accounts. But do you think you'll be using this cross-fund report again for us, or is it set up now so that this can be what we get on a monthly basis? What do you think you'll be giving us on a monthly basis?
Well, from what I understand, your preference are these reports.
I know, Director Harrison, but we understand the time, the people time.
So I'm gonna make a decision, but I'm gonna do my best to see if I can get you these 7 reports that you have normally been getting, going backwards. So I really don't have a good estimate of how much time it's gonna take to generate these 7 reports. But I just, until we get a new financial system, I'm gonna just see what it takes to get these 7 reports to you. The bank recs is pretty easy. The fund report is not too bad. So I'm thinking these ones in the middle here won't be as bad. And after you do something, repetition after repetition after repetition, you get more proficient. So I might find some shortcuts and
I just,
find a way to just speed up the process. But I'm looking forward to a brand new system at some point in the future that will, expedite all of this.
I'm just thinking about all the time to be doing some other things, and I probably because I hate reporting out into it myself. I say you think of all the things you could be doing instead of, but that's just a lot. So I'm looking forward to being able to consolidate this and make it easier for you guys. And just out of curiosity, how many people touch those to make that happen?
This report?
Those 7. How many different people are we?
It's just myself and Mr. Phelps.
Okay, it's just
Weekend work.
enough. Yeah. Ugh.
But those are the reports we put up on the website. And those are, from a transparency perspective, again, this is one of those things that it's really, really important to have out there. Other cities do it.
Right.
We can do it too.
Yes, we can.
And you're heading in the right direction. And I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Will you let us know if your available time to do this changes, or if you can't get reports to us on
I will.
when you think that we're looking for them? I just want you to feel that you can come to us anytime with
Okay.
any concerns that you have.
That
But
is a good question though, about the time frame, our expectations for when we get them back. That is something that I want to talk about just to see, because is the timeline of our expectations, is it in line with the workload
Right.
you have and what that looks like? Because even if we're getting 7 reports, maybe it's when we're asking for them back that might be helpful. In addition to that, too, we can figure that out. I would be curious about that too. I just want to make sure that the deadlines we set are actually aligning with the way you have to work.
Okay, speaking from my perspective, if you're worrying about doing these reports monthly, I'm not as concerned about seeing monthly reports. Quarterly reports, certainly. If that means you can get everything done on a more timely basis and get us quarterly reports, so we're not worrying about, for example, an April report. We're going to worry about the report we'll get in July for the second quarter.
Quarterly would definitely be more ideal.
That,
I think all 3 of us would agree.
Yeah.
That helps.
I'm gonna be careful. I recognize that, like for instance, I've had some conversation, we've spoken about this, with, Sugar Heights Finance. And how they sort of move through this work with finance and mayor and council. And they do a whole heck of a lot less report. I feel like they do maybe like a half year. And while I appreciate the sensitivity to sort of the time constraints and the labor intensity of this particular process under our current system, I am concerned that moving to quarterly, if we maybe can stretch ourselves and do monthly, I'm concerned that moving to quarterly might intensify or exacerbate the expressed concern about our forthrightness when it comes to finances. And so I appreciate the sort of the offer to move to a quarterly sort of thing, and that may be, if council is actually comfortable with that. But I want council maybe to think about that before making that request sort of just as a one-off in a meeting, and then we move in that direction. There are the majority of council members here, but I know that often the council likes to look to leadership, and leadership may have a different opinion of what is appropriate. And so maybe we can consider that and then maybe come back to that idea before we sort of make a decision about it.
So would you recommend that we take it to the committee of the whole to ask that question?
I am just offering a concern from outside of the council, viewing how council has tended to operate. Whether you think that's a viable or an important thing to consider, I don't want to make that determination for you. It's not sort of my suggestion. I would love it if we went to quarterly. I think that would put a lot less strain on finance. But I wanted to offer that out of care and concern for the operations of the council and how that might affect sort of your interpersonal workings.
If I may, I can see that. When I was thinking about it, just his capacity, your time to do this report. But I do know, just based on how things are, sometimes we have individual questions about expenditures or things, and so absolutely thinking about how the entire council is comfortable about that, because in some cases they may not be seeing some of that information until 2 or 3 months out. I don't know the council's appetite for that. I'm used to seeing things quarterly. But if we're looking at individual expenses and things like that, he's absolutely right. You're not going to see them at the same time that we normally would. There may be some additional questions about other pieces of legislation that come up in between that. So I think it would have to definitely be a group decision, and we're really, really comfortable with that, because I think quarterly is the way to go. But I know sometimes council has those pop-up questions about a specific transaction or something that may have happened, and now we might be looking 2 months down the road for it.
I'm wondering if, because this was a report you were able to just run,
Yes.
if we did the cross fund report, which we got last time, on a monthly basis, and then the quarterly report as the capsule, because we can see if there's an account that we're concerned about expenditure within the account on this cross fund report. We can see it, and you could send those to us whenever they're ready to pull
Yes.
on a monthly basis. So if we could get those on a monthly basis, and then we get quarterly,
Yes.
so
I can see those two for you.
yeah,
That's a great idea.
shall we do that? And then we'll just I will present it to council.
Council, yeah. I'm okay, but I don't know what everyone else feels like, but I think that's a great.
You okay with that? Councilor Cobb?
Sure.
So monthly, the cross fund report, and you also gave us a general fund income statement. That was an easy one to do as well.
Yes. Income statement.
And the cross.
There's probably a lot of your work in here too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You think, I'm sorry, you had that face on, so.
No, I'm good.
Oh, no, it's good.
He's tired. Okay, so we're gonna move on. I did wanna ask you, if we go to this reporting format, does that help you in terms of filing 2025 and audited financials?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah. Anything to save time.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
2025 unaudited will be due on probably May 30th
Mhm.
of 2026.
Mhm.
We'll make that deadline.
Maybe you will. We talked about the Meyer Manor transition already, the 100,000. There was also a piece of legislation on our Monday work that was resolution 113/2025. And this is for purchasing a Chevy GMC. And the ask is $90,000 and it's not budgeted. So I wanted to know which account that you deem appropriate to take that from, and if that also needs to go to the county auditor for a review.
And this is for Public Works.
Yes,
So the technically, when we do a budget adjustment, not sort of a transfer that does not impact a fund allocation or fund appropriation, but when we adjust a fund's appropriation, we don't need a review by the county before we make the change.
Okay.
We need to submit the change to the county once we've made it, and then they certify sort of the new budget. And so that process takes place first here.
Okay.
And then, once the change is made, we send it for certification.
yes. So the answer is yes, we can vote on it on the 16th, which is what I would be okay with you doing. Go ahead.
So on each piece of legislation that requires a financial transaction, you certify that transaction. Are you certifying that transaction before or after it goes to the county?
Those are two different things. So the budget change is one thing, the financial transaction is a different thing. So, it's, for instance, if we budgeted for something and then we are requesting council's authorization to contract for that thing that we budgeted for, that financial transaction does not need to be certified by the county.
Right.
Yeah, right. Certified by the finance officer's, certificate is placed on there certifying that we have the funds necessary to sign the contract. The contract is void unless the fiscal officer certificate is attached to that contract, or to that PO or whatever. The county certifies the fund budget, and that's a separate thing. So, if a particular transaction requires, say, an increase in the general fund budget that we have, appropriated for use in the year 2025, that increase in appropriation would be required to be sent to the county for their certification once the council has made that adjustment.
So we're in control.
Yeah, so it's not for each financial transaction. That requires the fiscal officer, the municipal fiscal officer certificate. The county fiscal officer needs to certify the budget appropriation per fund.
Any questions?
Right, you mentioned the Amani project again, we may wanna swing back to that for just a second.
Go ahead.
So, this has only happened on a couple of occasions, so there's quite a few residents who are watching. And each of them is asking, what's next with this? Is there a cutoff for allocations of funds like this? Folks really want us to come up with some kind of grants policy. That's definitely something we want to have a conversation with the committee to hold. Because when I started getting residents who don't necessarily even agree with each other all asking us a question like that, I know this is something that's gonna come up. And I knew when I walked in, but I didn't realize it was gonna bubble up while we were having a conversation here today. But it rightfully so, that does make sense in terms of what you do with any future proposals or requests or projects. I think that's gonna be huge before we do this.
Well, also, I think it became clear as we were talking to Mr. Ivory that when we did a request for money, we need some detail. I thought we were going into the brick and mortar with this 100,000. And he's saying program, 80% will be programmed. And so, yeah,
And that is definitely just transparent. I know when we talked about it,
Yeah.
initially that's what it was for. You start funding programs,
Yeah.
it's different because you're looking for future funding. You don't wanna fund something and then that fund runs out and then that program has to die. So typically you don't want to go 100% under any programs. And so one of the things that I think we wanna ask is how long would this funding be for? One program year, 2 programs years. Things like a program manager as a funding staff member or supply and things like I think now, since it's a lot easier when you start talking about construction and reno, but when you start talking about programs and things, you might want to get in more specifics, especially since now we're hearing that. And I know the public is really going to get their ears out because it's very easy to get money for brick and mortar. It's a lot more tricky to get money for programs. And so
no, we were talking about precedent. Didn't we give peacekeepers a grant?
that's what I was wondering if that was part of or not.
Yeah, but
That's right, we just went to youth, you invested.
no, that we're still working through some of the issues that we've had with the federal government. And working through that has been trial. But so the program that we were engaged in, that we are continuing to engage in hopes of bringing it to actual fruition with peacekeepers, peacemakers.
Sorry.
It is not something that we have. That's a grant that we have received. I'll put that in air quotes. From the federal government
Okay.
that has particular reporting requirements, and we're working through some issues with them on an ongoing basis. But I think the councilman makes a good point. When you look at other grant making organizations, I'm working nonprofit, working for and grant receiving organizations, and the reporting requirements that those nonprofits have to their funders can be rigorous.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you have to a grant making organization has to have a very clear understanding of what they expect to receive from the grant receiving organizations in order to determine whether or not the funding is being used in the way that it should be and the results that you hope for are being achieved. I don't know, I don't expect that the city government should turn into a grant-making organization as sort of a more primary goal. I think that's concerning because we've got some core functions that we still have work to do to improve. And so that can be sort of a distraction. It doesn't mean that any particular project that a council member comes up with and wants to fund is without merit. But I think that the council in sort of these one-off, okay, well, this is something that I think is important, let's give them some money. There is no real structure there. And since we are still, we're still in our infancy here as a new government. And I think that we have dealt with decades at this point of capacity loss in this organization. And so adding layers of, now we're going to be accepting, we do already in planning and development, specifically with our CDBG funds and that kind of thing. But I don't know that we need to add a whole layer of administrative staff to review submissions from nonprofits about their programs.
I think that what the conversation we had last night about reporting out is really critical. And I'm going to read that legislation again, 97-2025, because it would be very important to us to hear and progress reports, especially if it's a program, how long it's going to last. So I will talk to President Kuda about getting this on the agenda.
I agree. knowing now that it's for program, it's a lot easier again for someone to report back and show receipts and purchases for contracts and things, but there isn't that amount of money that I would receive for programming where it didn't require, number one, extensive reporting on a monthly basis of that. Number two, there were usually allocations phased within phases of it, so that you can see the progress of it, and that reporting allows you to then go ahead and receive the other portion. But as the mayor said, the issue with that is it requires a body to really walk through it and do all of these checks. And in our case, I would think a couple of different departments. So I'm concerned about that because I don't want to, this is a great project, but what I don't want to do is fund it as is. And then someone else comes along and now they have they've got rules, regulations, they've got all this stuff that this didn't have. I think we should have that in place now, what that reporting might look like, what our limits are, if this is something that we're going to do for a couple of nonprofits a year, what type of programs we want to fund, because I can tell you, just like once you start talking about programs, the community's going to want to know. They're going to know what these programs look like, what they're teaching, where this information is coming from now. And so it just opens up all these questions. And I know depending on what the nonprofit is, there may be some things that the public, once they realize what the program is, they're not interested in funding. And so I just want to make sure we're covered on that end. At the same time, I know that there's time restraints on this, but I do think we need to have some type of reporting or parameters and expectations, because I know for a fact, once you give any nonprofit $100,000, you're going to get 500 of them knocking on the door. And I want to make sure that we have an explanation for any yes or no's or process that we put people through. And my other concern is, and I'm sorry, this is just, when I start thinking about this, is that since it wasn't budgeted, this wasn't something a part of a greater strategic plan, you keep having these things pop up. What do you do? So if we're going to do this, I think that we need to budget one set of money and say, these are the projects you might want to support every year versus this, because the next project could be $250,000. And it's also important, but it's like, where do you cut that? So I know I'm going on. I'm just
But for
nervous
now,
about that process.
I don't want to hold up this project because it is really important to the community. So would you be amenable to, let's look, if I go over that legislation and look at, like last time we found mention of reporting out, but it wasn't very concise.
Right.
If there was possibility of an agenda or an amendment to that resolution, perhaps 97-2025, would you be amenable to, looking at it, voting on it on the 16th, or do you want more work to be done?
No, absolutely. I think I'd be open to that. I just want to make sure, I think as a council too, before we do that, I still think we need to talk about, is this the limit? What that looks like before we do that vote, so that we can set that for any public expectation going forward, at least for 2025. But because it's just a significant amount of money, and if they were to get that from another organization, the reporting would be completely different. The application process would be completely different.
So, I think it's important that we say that we are not in the business to give grants. That is not our core. This is not what we do. And I think that the mayor already mentioned that. There's other higher, more important things that a city does. Now, with that said, there's some exceptions. Okay, the fun run, of course we want to support that. The music hop, another thing that we're going to want to support. This particular project, it seems worthy, but I kind of at this point believe that we have a lot of things on our platter right now, and going through a big thing and formalized process that I think is as we move forward as an organization, there's some time in the future where that's going to be necessary. I am very much okay if we just put some language in the contract, puts the onus on the person that's getting the money to come back to council within a particular amount of time to give a report back of how the event went and how the money was used, and put some time frame on that, and let that be the issue. We don't have to worry about an administrator. There's not a lot of these. I don't believe we have to worry about making sure an administrator has that job. But the expectation is this is what we want to see. And be very clear on that.
Would you do that amount, or is there a certain amount where you would want more reporting back? Like I know you mentioned reporting how they spent the money. Is there any amount where you would want to see receipts or anything you think council should set that amount?
Well, I mean, I don't think we have the capacity to really do that. I mean, in this, $75,000 to go to the music hop is very different than $100,000 to this project. So I think in that contract, whoever is putting that legislation forward really needs to have the responsibility to put some check and balance in there. And I think it's up for us to watch that as council members. In this particular case, I'd like to have a report back in maybe 6 months of
That's what I was thinking.
how the funds of how the funds were used, and give us an idea from the bigger picture of how things went.
I will talk to Vice President Russell and let her know that this is what our concern is, so that we can move it on, but we're in, for this particular project, we still want to report back, and then the big picture is a strategy for these requests. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Do you have any plans for searching for a new software?
I do. So, on Monday, May 12th, we met with Brandon Easterman from Software Solutions. They have a product called VIP, Visual Intelligence Portfolio. And he met with myself and Ryan Prosser, our IT director. And we did not have a demo of the system, but he did give us some information that I'd like to share with you. From what I understand, this is a very robust system, very user-friendly, should serve all our needs. It is currently being used by Euclid, South Euclid, Independence, Highland Heights, University Heights, and Richmond Heights. It's used, there's 88 counties in Ohio. It's used by 40 of those counties. The dark blocks indicate the counties that are using this VIP system. And this is their footprint just in northeastern Ohio. So they've got quite a number of customers in northeastern. Well, I guess this is kind of like this entire state of Ohio, not just northeastern Ohio. Look at it, because here's West Virginia right here.
There's clusters up in the northeast.
But there's a lot of activity right here in northeastern Ohio as well. So the next step for this will be a demonstration of this system. So Ryan and I will definitely take a good look at it. But that'll be next step. So we are moving forward to integrating a new financial system at some point, hopefully in the very near future.
Fabulous.
So that graphic is pretty telling, and you can sort of see the size, the one behind that. It's the one where the bigger population areas in Ohio seem to be using, there's higher concentrations of the use of this package. We're a city of a certain size, accounting systems generally work well. An accounting system for a really big city is probably not a good fit, but probably you don't want one for a real small city either. And I think in your network of people, you're going to find that out. And I would assume that there's an organization, a loose organization of finance directors of like entering suburbs. I don't know if you attend to those meetings or part of that, or if there's other organization. I know different departments have sort of peer groups that they work with, which would give you a great idea. And sometimes it's you want an accounting system that you can find resources in order to run. I mean, people know how to use this. So if there's a big group of people within northeastern Ohio that use this package, and I'm happy that you noticed that they're telling you, you can coach people who work in those cities to immediately come in and start using this package immediately.
He did provide a contact at Euclid, so I encourage us to go over there, take a look, and so I I plan to do that. So again, Euclid and both Euclid, South Euclid. Ryan actually came from Independence. So he's more familiar with it, the system than I am. So that's another resource for a demo or just help or just understanding the system. But again, Euclid, South Euclid, Independence, Highland Heights, University Heights, Richmond Heights, those municipalities are comparable to Cleveland Heights. So I think I have high hopes for this system. So
That's good.
yeah, next steps will be to really, get in there, see how easy it is to use, understand the reporting capabilities of the system, and see if it's going to be a good fit for us.
What about a data conversion in order to get your data from the old system to the new system? Do they have tools for that?
We talked about implementation. He gave us all the assurance that we were looking for, that they will have folks on site. They will handle data conversion. They will handle all of the historical data. So that's one of the key components of migrating from one system to the other. So that's very important.
So it ended up being like a turnkey contract where the engagement has a scope of work that includes moving the data from one site to the other.
Yeah, and that's first and foremost. So that'll be first phase of the project is maintaining our historical data.
I have one question for you to ask them. I don't need to have the answer, but just the hardest thing is usually payroll. When you go from one payroll module to another payroll module, you may want to just sort of ask them to see how well that goes, or maybe when you're talking to your references, see how well that went.
And if they beta tested it before they put it online.
That's just my 2 cents. I'm encouraged that you're at a point this year where we're looking at these. You know that there's an issue and you need a new system.
Yes.
I'm sure you talked about report writing too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I was asked at the last committee of the whole to add this item to the agenda. The discussion of the mayor's authority to transfer funds between accounts during the fiscal year. And I have 3 questions, and I want to keep this as internal control discussion. Like what you have internal control set up to be at this point, when funds are being transferred. So if you have internal control procedures, when the mayor comes and requests that you move funds from one account to another, do you have a document that you use to keep a record of that was done on what day and it was signed off on?
To the best of my knowledge, no, we do not. And also to the best of my knowledge, we have not moved any funds in 2025 from one fund to another that I'm aware of. Okay.
And I would say, just for clarity, this is not something that comes from the mayor's office. This is, if there's ever a need to move money, I don't hear about it first. This is brought to me. So, for instance, I think one of the things that we were asked to take a look at, and we were talking about the purchase of the vehicle for public works, right? And it's not budgeted for, but the director indicated that there is available money that is already budgeted. Like that wasn't specifically budgeted for as an expenditure, but there's available money in Fund 201 that can absorb that cost. Now, in order to use those dollars, it may be that we have to take money from capital projects and put it in capital equipment, or from salary that isn't being used and put it in capital equipment in order to appropriately keep track of that purchase and adjust the within fund budget. You want to keep an appropriate record of where the money came from for that particular expense and the type of expense that it is. So in that case, this would be a situation where council is approving the contract, and we move forward with the purchase. But in order to affect that purchase in the most responsible way, so that we can down the road look back and see what purchases were made and from what funds, and whether or not they were from the appropriate object and that kind of thing. Or account, going in the system and moving whatever those dollars are for that particular piece of equipment into capital equipment from some other section of the Fund 201 budget is what we'd be looking at. It's not a normal situation, but
I'm just curious about how you document that. Is it a place in the system where you can document
I
how
have
that
no
was
idea.
authorized, or is there something scanned in? You know, in the past when we've had to move dollars around too, is there, I'm just looking at the audit record of transactions. So,
I think that would be more interdepartmental, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in most organizations, the executive leader wouldn't touch any of that. Like anything that I run, those department heads and those leads and the finance folks. But in terms of touching the actual money or making decisions to move it, for me at the level I'm sitting at, it wouldn't make much sense. I would only be moving it because someone put in a request and asked for something to be allocated. So I think any information that you're looking for will probably be in that line between Director Klingskull in this case and finance, and then if it jumps someplace else, I think it would end up with him last, or maybe even the council. So I'm thinking any clarification that we needed, I think, is in that part of the process. Just from what I'm thinking of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in order for him to see it, it would have automatically had to be triggered unless I guess it would be from your department that had the need.
I mean, I suppose like in the mayor's office, for instance, if I'm not using salary, but we realize we need more pencils.
When you move money within a fund, so like take the finance budget, I move some money from one area of the budget to another area of the budget within the finance budget. The New World system shows you that move. It shows
And the date and everything.
Yeah, it shows you there's an audit trail built right into it. But I have no experience to date with moving it from one fund to another fund. So there may be some type of an audit trail within our system, but again, I just haven't had that experience yet.
If I could, during a recent council meeting, committee of the whole meeting, directors Shantz and Gonzalez gave the example of, for the upcoming Juneteenth event, needing to move money to ensure that sufficient funds are able to pay to JAPO. I think that they said that funds from both Parks and Rec and Communications were going to be moved into an account. So I'm assuming that that's an example of moving across accounts within a fund. Is that right?
That would be, yeah. And there are two ways to do it, basically. One way is to consolidate into one fund or one account in order to make the payment. Obviously, the other way is to just pay from multiple accounts. But I think it's cleaner to sort of do that consolidation so that you are making the one payment. You have the movement from I don't know what to the special events funds or something, and then from there you make the payment. That's probably the cleanest way to do it. I think the other way, and I think the way potentially historically things have been done here, which is not my preference, is that payments were just sort of made, and people weren't paying very close attention to where the money was coming from. And maybe this is sort of just a function of the chaos, maybe that's too strong a word, between, sort of the period of time where the city of Cleveland Heights voted to change our government and when a new government took place, because there was a lot of the holding pattern and sort of the way things were done maybe wasn't as rigorous during that period of time. But I am not entirely sure about that and how far that practice goes back. But that's something that we're trying to be a little bit more strict about. And so, and I think this is something that we ran into. I and Lily were looking at this. Why there was an issue with the budget not tying for 1 year, but it did for other years. And it may have been because, just they weren't being rigorous about how they were making expenditures out of funds and sort of changing the budget in order to do that. And that's something that we have to be aware of and sort out and then be rigorous about enforcing.
How often do transfers across accounts happen like this?
You mean
Ballpark,
within a fund?
within a
or-
fund across accounts.
Maybe twice a month.
Okay.
Like that. Probably more transfers will occur in the latter part of the year. More in the kind of the first half of the year. People's budgets are robust. They have, plenty of funds. As the year progresses, and funds are mostly spent, 80-90% spent, then people may be searching for additional resource and shifting money around. So I expect more activity in the latter part of this year than the first part.
Good.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay. I'm gonna consider that topic closed. It was helpful to hear.
Well, I don't know exactly how to do it, but I know that council has some sensitivity to being informed about within fund adjustments and that kind of thing. And so I don't know exactly how it would work. And I don't know what additional work it would be for finance either, but if it is the case that council wants to be informed about each one of those things as they happen, we can sort of figure out what the mechanism is to affect that.
Is that why? Because I'm trying to figure out where this came from. I didn't know if that was a reason with the reporting.
I just think it's wondering what the internal control process was
Okay.
from my perspective, because that's what I'm curious about, is how the department documents for a clear audit trail.
Okay,
Yeah.
I thought maybe there was another, like a report we wanted to see so we could see throughout the month. I didn't know if that's
I
what you were.
don't think we need that kind of detail. Do you remember?
So what I was wondering was whether council would be interested in pursuing legislation that would require authorization before moving money across accounts. This offer of, sharing changes, I think that would accomplish the goal of increased transparency without needing to create work for people, needing to come to council for approval, when it would likely be given already. Similar with the contract legislation, it achieves the goal of increased transparency without creating much additional work. So if it's the case that we were able to, at some point get an overview of transfers that have been made, I think that would be helpful.
Why don't we add an 8th item there, which is basically a transfer report.
So this would be from fund to fund or within funds?
Because any between fund transfer, council has to authorize.
Okay.
How often do we want to, is that one quarterly too, I'm hoping? I know. Well, I don't know.
I think that you need to look at that and see how easy that is to pull.
I mean, we're hearing that it's not happening a lot.
I don't think it's happening a lot. I don't think a lot of people, a lot of users of New World, I don't know that they're aware of how to actually do a transfer. I've taken the time to learn how to do a transfer. I've made transfers within the finance budget just to allocate more resources where they were needed. So we had an incident just last week, our Human Resources Department, they had a couple of temporary employees. The budget that they're operating under wasn't created by the current assistant director in Human Resources, and only $1,000 was allocated to temp help. That wasn't nearly enough money there's only 2 full-time people in the Human Resources Department. So they've got a couple of temps, and so I had to actually do a transfer to Human Resources so they could actually, make payroll for these temps.
But you would have had documentation from the HR director or assistant that they needed that money transferred, right?
Well, I was a little bit more proactive. I'm constantly looking at budgets.
Yeah.
And, so I actually proactively called her and said, are you aware that your temp budget is overspent? You don't have any money to buy that. And so just kind of made her aware And then promised in the future to sit down with her and just kind of give her just a little bit more education on managing her budget.
Ready for 2026, yeah.
Yeah.
So report number 8, we'll look at it and see how much labor it takes. Is that all right?
Does it solve it?
And I think that I was looking for a conversation among council members, and I think that that's what we're having to see if this is something of interest from people.
So he will look at the viability of.
Yeah, I'll definitely take a look at it.
And then if it can be done monthly when we get the report easily, efficiently, then that would help supplement the monthly report. Ready? Everybody okay? Because you are up next, and Vice Chair Maddox has already informed me that he would rather be put on the next agenda. Is that putting it
Yeah.
correctly?
I brought both iPads, but not the laptop that I had the presentation on, and I didn't realize how robust this agenda was anyway, looking at the time, so.
I would like to let everybody go home mow their lawns.
Right.
Good? Everybody? All right. Okay. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Mayor. And good meeting, we got a lot done, and we got through it except for you.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna adjourn this meeting at 6:51.